We are sitting right now with Carlos Ruiz Zafon, who's the author of The Angel's Game, a brand new book. It's a follow-up to the global phenomenon, The Shadow of the Wind, which we'll talk lots about. But first, it's great to have you here at Borders. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, you're fans of Shadow of the Wind. Again, we said a global phenomenon. This is a book that has won people over all over the world. We'll be very excited about The Angel's Game because there are many elements of this book that go back to parts, places, and in some cases people that they got to know during The Shadow of the Wind. But it's not necessary to read one before the other. Tell me about the structure of the book and how you decided to write this second book.
Yeah, well, quite often readers ask me, is this a prequel, is it a sequel, what it is? I say, well, it's none of those things and all of the above. It's a completely standalone story. But what it does is this goes back to when I started working on Shadow of the Wind. I had this idea for 4 novels, 4 stories that could be interconnected, that would share some characters, some plot lines, some elements, but that could be read in any order. My idea was to create some kind of Chinese box of fiction, some kind of labyrinth of the stories in which you could enter through any door, and depending what door you would enter, you could read 1 or 2 of these stories, or them all in any order you wanted. Your experience could be altered, could be different. You could discover different layers. So Shadow of the Wind was in some ways the first act of this story, although it's not a sequential story.
That's right, you actually go back.
Yeah, you go back in time.
Because,
and in The Angel's Game, pretty much what we find is a second act, and second acts are where the plot thickens, where things get darker, more complicated, and before we see the end, the light at the end of the tunnel, we're going to see a lot of complications. So we're going to meet some of the characters we met. We're going to go back to the cemetery of forgotten books and find many more things that we didn't know about this place before. And we're going to find a lot of the secrets that were hidden inside Shadow of the Wind, and we're going to see them from a different perspective.
When you write, this element of magic that permeates some of your work, is it something that you like your readers to suspend disbelief or to go down into this imaginary world of sorts?
One of the things I wanted to do with The Angel's Game, I always said that Shadow of the Wind is a story that does everything for you. You just have to sit back and enjoy the ride. And I thought that what would be interesting with The Angel's Game, rather than just try to repeat exactly the exact same thing, is try to create a book that in many ways forced the reader, invited the reader to step into the process of storytelling and complete it. And I thought it would be very interesting if the story could get the reader to enter the shoes, to step into the shoes of this character. And depending on how we would interpret, depending on who we are, what do we bring into the story would acquire different meanings.
That's right.
So in many ways, there's a game, and there's a game with the reader in which the very story, because Shadow of the Wind, for instance, is a story about readers, about people who fall in love with literature, with books. This is a story that enters the same world, but from a different door, and it's a story about writers, about the process of creation, about storytelling, about the very nature of language. And what I felt would be really interesting would be to challenge readers and take this whole idea a little step ahead and try to create a story that could be many stories at the same time, and that would create some kind of hall of reflections for the reader when you step into this place. And depending on who you are, what is inside of you, the story is going to change and it's going to acquire different meanings. That makes it maybe slightly more challenging read than Shadow of the Wind. But I felt that rather than being condescending to the readers and rather than just, give them again what is Shadow of the Wind. Shadow of the Wind is already again. I thought it would be interesting to try to bring something new, try to complicate things and try to enrich this world from a different perspective.